Hi there, listener, and welcome to episode 223 of the Ski Podcast. This episode is the third in a series of podcasts I'm publishing this winter, focusing on women in the snow sports industry. First up in episode 220 was BBC Ski Sunday presenter Shemi Alcott. Second in episode 222, GB Snow Sports CEO Vicky Gosling. And today I'm delighted to bring you my conversation with Joanna Yellowlees-Bound. We cover her 40-year career in the ski industry, starting as a fresh-faced graduate when she was employed as a resort rep with only 24 hours notice, on her journey to becoming managing director of Erna Low, one of the oldest and well-known companies in the UK. Joanna is one of the most experienced professionals in the ski industry, with a career that spans the halcyon days of the ski business in the 1980s to our post-Brexit world today. We also touch on her new role, working with her husband Mensun Bound, who is the marine archaeologist who discovered the wreck of Shackleton's Endurance. I'm sure you'll find her story as interesting as I did. But before we start, I'd like to thank Intersport Ski Hire for sponsoring the show again this winter and for making all of these episodes possible. If you are heading to the snow, listener, don't forget you can save money when you book your ski hire at intersportrent.com and use a code SKIPODCAST. You get a guaranteed discount for ski hire in France, Austria and Switzerland. And to make it even simpler, you don't need to use a code. Just take the link in the show notes and your basket will automatically be reduced. Right, let's listen to my interview with Joanna Yellowlees-Bound. Hi, Joanna. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. It's really good to be here.
Whereabouts are you today?
Currently, I'm in Spain, living and working out here for 6 weeks.
A question I always like to ask my guests is, when did you last ski or snowboard? So for you, when was that? When did you last ski or snowboard?
I skied twice last year. I skied in Val d'Isère before Christmas with Consentio holidays, which was pure luxury and wonderful. And then I skied again in probably my favourite ski resort, Arc 1950, in March.
Excellent. Well, we'll come on to both of those two destinations, particularly Arc 1950, a little bit later on. But I referred to your experience in the industry. I asked you when you last skied or snowboarded. I wonder if you could take you back and ask you a different question. When did you first ski or snowboard? How did you start skiing?
Okay. Well, actually, that memory is very fixed in my head. It goes back to, I was trying to think of the date. It must have been 67 or 68, because it was at the point when you had the £50 travel allowance from the British government, where your families could only take £50 when they went travelling. And I remember first seeing the Matterhorn for the first time and being completely blown away. And then again being blown away because we went to Livigno with Club Med, who were just amazing. I mean, I as a little girl, I was fascinated by the Club Med beads that they used to have, because I could buy, there was gold, brown and cream, and you could buy all sorts of little goodies and drinks and sweets after skiing with their Club Med beads. There's a real sense of community. And it's the first time that really kind of hit me that skiing is about family and community. And I'll never forget that. And seeing my parents learn to ski at sort of 50, they're fairly elderly parents, but they really gave it a go. That was your first experience of skiing in Livigno. And how old were you then? I was about 8 years old.
Okay, 8. So subsequently, I'm guessing you continued to go skiing, but at some point you decided that you wanted to go and do a ski season. How did that come about?
That came about from school skiing. I mean, I think back in my day, the 70s and 80s, the school group skiing were really a big deal. And I'll never forget just going by bus to a tiny little resort in Austria, packed full, with maybe 2 slopes, and having the most amazing time in my life. And I always thought, if there was any opportunity at some point to be in ski, then I'd do it.
And so how did that come about then? Was this before university or after university?
That was before university. And I managed to get myself onto the school ski trips as a helper in the upper 6 and also in my gap year, so I could keep skiing. Because we didn't have we didn't ski as a family at that point, so I had to find other ways of doing it. And the school trips were really what kind of drove me to make sure I could get to the Alps.
So you're telling me that as a sixth former, you got to go along for free on the school trip by helping out with the younger kids? I'm surprised there weren't loads of teachers volunteering to do that job.
Well, there were loads of teachers, but my German teacher happened to organise it, and we happened to get on really well. So she needed a helper. And so I put myself forward and said, I can do it. You know, I'm 17 now. You know, there's no harm. And yeah, so I was incredibly lucky, really.
Right, and you mentioned German then. Am I right in thinking that you did languages at university?
Yeah, I did French and German at university. Sorry, well, actually, I did English, French, and German. I changed a bit, but yes, it was languages has always been where my heart was. Yeah.
When therefore you graduated, you were thinking about, you know, doing another ski season or doing a ski season after that. Is that how that started?
Yeah, do you know what? I didn't know what I wanted to do. I'd been to Oxford. I'd sort of, the world was sort of wide open for me, and I ended up in London, sort of really uncertain, looking at all sorts of opportunities. And then one day I just saw an advert in the Evening Standard. That's how you got jobs in the old days, proper little small ads. Yeah. And I turned up at this little Muse in South Kensington. It just gripped me because it just said assistant needed in ski company, something really simple. And I turned up at the Muse in South Kensington, which was the sort of office and home of Erna Low, and met this little old lady, Miss Low, along with a queue of about 10 other girls, I think I seem to remember, and got a hammering from her in my interview. Cut a long story short, after having been backed up against the wall by her poodle, because she was quite fierce and her dog was quite fierce, she said, well, you can have the job if you go to the Alps tomorrow. And accompany a flight lieutenant who was looking at taking a group to the ski resort of Plagne. So I didn't dare tell her that I came from Cheshire and I didn't have my passport. So I just said, yeah, absolutely. And a lot of shenanigans with my mother. We arranged to send the passport down overnight on a train. And she never knew that I didn't have the passport. And I just turned up at lunchtime the next afternoon, ready to go from Victoria with this flight lieutenant, and off we went on the train. So that was my first trip, and that was to Plagne.
Okay, so just to track back a bit then. So you're in London, and you've got a copy of the Standard, and you see an advert in there, and you went straight away to the advert?
Well, I remember it particularly well because Wednesday was the day for the jobs, for the advertising the jobs. So the advert was out on the Wednesday morning, and I got the interview for the Thursday morning. And I ended up going to the Alps on the Friday lunchtime. So it was a bang, bang, bang. And I just remember just thinking always, I can't say no, just got to say yes to everything. And off I went. I didn't even know who this man was. And it was me and him and about 2 or 3 others. And I was given the role of trying to show him around the ski resort I didn't know. I'd never been to. But I spoke French. I'd been very well briefed by Miss Low, as she was always known, Miss Low. And she briefed me fully, and I just went and had all the meetings and sorted it out and kind of tried to show that I knew a bit about skiing. Went on really well. And by the Tuesday, he'd booked several groups for 1,000 people at the end of it. So I ended up being quite popular with her after that.
Wow, yeah, that's good. And so this wasn't during the season. It wasn't like you went out
it was
there
October.
Out there. So you went out in October. You had to show a guy a ski resort in October when presumably there was, I don't know, no snow around.
To be honest, it was pretty grim. I think we all know what some ski resorts can look like in the sort of off season when nothing's going on. And it was very bleak. So there was a lot of chit chatting. He was a very experienced flight lieutenant, so he knew what he was doing. But it was kind of tough going there, trying to sell a ski trip for over 1,000 people in the middle of the off season, not really knowing knowing nothing about the resort, because I'd never been to French. I'd never done any French skiing. I'd always done Austrian and Swiss.
That's very admirable. How did you travel out there then? Did you fly out there?
No, went out by train. We went out by train, which was very much the old kind of travel ways that Erna Low did it. She would take a lot of people out by train to the Alps. That was, you've got to remember, when I joined her, she'd already bought and sold her company twice. So she was actually semi-retired at that point, and she was doing she'd been offered by La Plagne to be a sort of consultant for them to try to build up the ski market in La Plagne and bring groups and do their press and PR and so on in the UK. It was very different times. It was not the way you did things now.
For sure. Well, we'll come on to La Plagne a bit more detail and Low's relationship with them later. It was interesting you said about travel by train. I mean, I was lucky enough, like yourself, my parents were skiers and got me skiing at a fairly young age. and talking to them. They always, in their early ski holidays, they always went out by train. Several of those holidays I know were with Erna Low, also with Inghams, who were operating back then. It's I wouldn't say it's turned full circle because not many people travel by train right now, but regular listeners will know I'm a big fan of that. So that first ski season that you did, what year was that? Was it early 80s?
That was would have been 1982. So October 82, I did my off-season viewing of La Plagne with the flight lieutenant. And then I did a ski season that first year. But Miss Low was very clever, actually. I look back at it with interest because I didn't do a whole ski season. I did this for 2 or 3 years. She sent me out for 6 to 8 weeks over the Christmas, New Year period. Then I was brought back when it was the low season, so I could slave in the office. And then I was sent out again in February to do the peak seasons. And then the same thing, I'd be back for a few weeks and then I'd be sent out again. So she was very good at maximizing staff operations because it was small. There was only Erna Low, Miss Low herself, and her old secretary, who was wonderful, quite formidable lady called Bobby Shafto, who'd worked for her for years. And then she took me on to sort of develop the bookings for La Plagne. So that's what I did that first season, La Plagne. I did it again for second season. And so my seasons were actually very mixed. They weren't pure sort of working out as a rep. It was kind of nice because I would actually make the bookings and then go out and meet them out there. And then I'd go back and make a few more bookings and go and meet the next lot. Actually,
it wasn't even a seasonal job then, was it? So you from that moment when you started, were you working for Erna Low full time?
I was working full time for her from that moment, and it was really mainly an office-based job. But being a clever lady, she realised that we'd managed to book a whole load of people at all the peak dates, all the school holiday dates. So she sent me out, and of course I was really keen to go, and I was putting forward the case that it would be an extremely good idea to send me out there to look after our clients. And actually, it really was because I saw both ends, and I handled everything with one assistant who was a South Tyrolean au pair who kind of just helped me, who was an au pair who looked after her dog at the same time.
It sounds like she worked out well. And we have to remember as well, I mean, you mentioned you saw that advert in a newspaper. It was pre-internet. I mean, we're also talking about an era there that was pre-mobile phones. I mean, I did my first ski season in 1988. So within that era, we did have fax. At that point, maybe I seem to recall fax was a relatively kind of new invention. How did you do the comms between resort and the UK?
The fax was extremely exciting because I'm a few years ahead of you, Iain, and I have the Telex. I don't think you would have had a Telex. That was pre-fax, and that was this wonderful kind of machine that sat in the corner, a very kind of scary-looking machine. And it was this sort of advent of the fax coming along. And I remember when the fax appeared, to me, it just seemed like some kind of magical device. How could you possibly send a piece of paper through the telephone? I still think that, actually.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is amazing. But certainly, in my earlier seasons, the fax made such a big difference. Unfortunately, it often meant that you'd get late bookings that you'd be notified about on a Friday night. And, in my case, when I was doing seasons, we didn't have a fax machine in our office or in my apartment. They get sent to the tourist office. So sometimes you wouldn't even find out about them until the Saturday morning.
Yeah. And you know what, Iain, the other thing is, of course, people forget we didn't have mobile phones or anything. So we were just left to deal with things. There was no issue. There was no question of calling up and getting advice on anything. You just had to sort out problems on the spot.
Possibly touched on this before in other podcasts, but a reason why there are so many people who've done ski seasons who are working within the ski industry is that experience that you get when you're working a season and dealing with issues on the spot really does brief you well for working in the travel industry. But I wondered if I could just segue back to Erna Low and the office there. I mean, you were working there all year round, and you said it was a very small operation. So actual Miss Erna Low, the owner of the company, bought it and sold it several times. But she really mentored you and delegated a lot of work to you.
Yes, she did. It's interesting. I was thinking about it. And I suppose I wasn't completely full-time until 2 years because she allowed me to go off in the summer for about 2 months with my husband to go diving on shipwrecks with him because he's a marine archaeologist. So she allowed me to do that. But then pretty quickly, she realized she really needed me all the time. the moment she thought, when I think I asked her, she said, yeah, you can go, because I could see in her head, yes, that's a saving. She can go. And I'll have her back again in 6 weeks or 2 months.
As a reminder to listeners who might not be aware, I mean, the company, by the time you joined in 1982, it was already 50 years old. I think, we have an excellent episode all about Erna Low, and we'll come to that in a minute. But I think it started in 1932 when she also put an advert maybe into the Times or something like that.
Yes, she did. Yeah. She put a small ad in, and it was just a simple advert saying people were invited to go skiing with her. It was almost like going on a dinner party or something. You were invited to go skiing, and then the quiet subject of money would probably come up afterwards. So, yeah, that's exactly how it started. She also realized, being Austrian, she wanted to go back home. She realized if she took 10 people, she'd get a free place. If she took 20 people, she might get £1. 30 people, she'd start making real money. And that was really how her whole business started. I've learned so much from her as to how she would jump on opportunities. And she obviously saw this as a very good opportunity. Yeah,
and that was a ski holiday, but she was also doing catered house parties in the UK as well. And I think that there's a debate within the industry as to exactly who created the ski chalet holiday. There's other companies as well, but certainly Erna Low was a key driver in that catered chalet trip.
Well, yes, absolutely, because she planted the seeds for the whole thing. I always kind of feel in between the wars, between World War and World War One and Two, there was a real distinct need for community and coming together. So she created what was called the house party. It's a lovely name, the house party. And that was, she would take over schools, mansions, country houses, and she would staff them with her own staff and create entertainment, and they would do all the food and look after them. So that was the house party. And that house party became the concept for the chalet party. And so when it came to the 60s, 70s, she started doing similar things to the Alps, but you're absolutely right. There were others doing it, and probably the key one was Colin Mewison Small from Small World, who did it with real dedication. Whereas with Erna Low, she might not take it for the whole season. She might do 8 weeks. Colin very much sort of guaranteed chalets for a year to go and really went for it. So I think the combination of the two of them is what really started the boom in the chalet party.
We have a special episode all about Erna Low, which I recorded with Mark Frary, and we'll come on to that a little bit later on. But I never actually met Erna Low. I know my career in the industry did overlap with her, but she had a reputation as being quite formidable. Someone who certainly wouldn't suffer fools gladly. Is that a correct assessment of her character?
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. She kept me on my toes all the time, and anyone who worked for her was constantly on their toes. She was a tough lady, but she was very fair. We used to have the odd blowout, and usually, if it was reasonable that I was right, she would come round it, but she'd never admit it. She'd just go out and buy a piece of Apfelstrudel from South Kensington, bring it round the corner and give it to me as a kind of peace offering. She was not the easiest person to work with, and she was also incredibly tough and an amazingly tough negotiator. For me, that was really useful because I learned so much. I used to go on her contracting trips around the Alps with her and drive her about as her driver. That was another job I had, by the way. I was driver as well. And I used to be in on all the meetings with the hoteliers, and she would go to the very last moment to get the last pfennig out of them on the deal. And I remember I used to feel slightly embarrassed because I thought I think I've learned over the years to be a win-win person more. You can't squeeze people too much. But she did it. She did it very successfully. She was very, very tough. Yeah. But she was very soft underneath.
You mentioned she was a good negotiator there, but that personal touch was very important. I mean, she wanted to be involved in all of those different elements herself.
Yes, absolutely. She wanted to be involved in everything. And I think that was why her staff were always kept on her toes, because she'd want to be known she'd always be there looking and watching, even if she wasn't doing the job. You felt her there. I mean, I almost to this day, well, not now, but when after I sold the company, I felt her looking over my shoulder to see what I'm doing. Not in a creepy way, but she was just a very powerful personality. That personality was what really kind of built the brand. I mean, it's a very strong brand. And to this day, I'm really proud of the company because there's been so many clients who've gone through this and know the brand so well.
You mentioned thinking about Erna herself. I mean, she may have been a kind of tough negotiator, but she definitely clearly had a lot of commercial acumen. She was very good at spotting gaps in the market, like the house parties that you mentioned. And back in the 1960s, when France, what I think is called the third generation of French ski resorts, the purpose-built resorts, for example, in Plagne and La Plagne and Les Arcs, they weren't particularly big with the British market at that time. It's hard to imagine that now when, more British skiers go to France than anywhere else. But she spotted that really early on, didn't she?
She did. She spotted it really early, and she was always looking for the next best thing. Her holidays, whenever holidays, it's always going exploring, seeing what's coming up next, what's happening next. And this was throughout the summer too. If you look back through all her brochures, it's not just ski. She was all over the place. She did not stop trying to search out the latest exciting destination. And she obviously spotted French resorts were going to be the future.
I think you mentioned earlier that Erna Low were representing La Plagne in the British market. That's something she took on a kind of PR type of role as well?
Yes, she did. But she kind of, again, made it into her own thing, because when she was approached to work for La Plagne, it was to be like a PR representative, because she'd already sold her company twice at that point. It was semi-retired, but was certainly not a retiring lady. Was approached by La Plagne to do their press and PR. But at the same time, she says, well, I can bring you bookings too. We can book direct as well. And, she kind of made it into kind of, I can be your UK office. And it developed from there. And she sort of developed a contract with them where she ran all the bookings at direct with the resort, plus the press, PR, events, groups, that kind of thing, sort of alongside other tour operators. So it was a very clever thing. And then following that, she got the contract for Plagne. And then after Plagne, I kind of was being trained up on this. I was with her when she got Plagne, which was really exciting. So I kind of learned what her formula was and did the same thing and developed it into Les Arcs as well. So I brought in Les Arcs. And so we had La Plagne, Plagne and Les Arcs for really quite a few years. But it's interesting. I look back at it and it was a moment in time. It was before the internet when that was a useful thing to have for them in the UK. But I remember my heart was sinking towards the mid-90s when I saw that we were no longer quite so relevant anymore to the resorts, because what they wanted was to have all the business brought direct to them, not via any mediator. And, the .com sort of thing of everything going to them. So we didn't have that same use to them. And I think that often happens in business. You have things that work really well for a while, and then actually you have to think again. And that was actually at a point when I was fairly mature in the company in the 2000s, and I had to think really fast. What do we do? La Plagne, Les Arcs and Plagne don't need us in the same way. So while we were still strong, I built a French Alps program for her, a self-catering, which was all about self-catering of all sorts, from studios to luxury apartments, all over the French Alps. And we went fully bonded again with ATO and became a proper tour operator. So I set that all up for her. Starting in about 96, I think it was. Because she didn't want to go that route initially, because she'd sort of, she was in her 70s, 80s at this point. But then I'd been with her so long, she was really happy for me to take that on.
Well, it must have been great having all that on-the-job training with Erna, and evidently her style wasn't necessarily for everyone. But I think it was in 1996 that you became managing director of the company. Yeah. Was it always kind of agreed? Was it tacitly agreed that you would take over? And, how did her retirement... Yeah. Was it planned or was it sudden?
It was planned in a very Erna Low kind of way, in that about trust, really. She'd said early on she wanted someone who would take over the company. And to her life was Erna Low. I think she loved the thought of it continuing after she'd gone. And so she looked at me as being the one who could take it forward after her. So, I had a wonderful opportunity, really, to do this. And she made it very clear early on, but it wasn't a normal kind of takeover. I remember she retired. Her method of retirement was slightly different to others. She decided to go home one day at Wimbledon and watch tennis in June. I remember it particularly well, June 96. And she called me around to her house, because I used to go, she was just around the corner in South Kensington, and came and said, right, now it's your time to go. The company will be yours in the future. The funny thing is, actually, when she did that, it was roughly about the time of the ERM exchange rate collapse, and the company was worth pretty well nothing. Because I had a couple of years a very difficult years with her, to be honest, where She's probably stayed on too long, and she would say it herself. And I had to track her and try to sort of fix the problems that she was coming up with quietly without people seeing. And one of the things she refused to do was to buy forward on currency. So we lost all our margin one year. So as I always say, you never have success without some very difficult challenges.
The challenges of the exchange rate have always been an issue and remain so, but it's much more stable now. After she retired then, she wasn't working anymore, you were managing director, but did she still stay involved?
She, in a strange tacit way, she did, in that the agreement we had was that it was done purely on verbal agreement that I would look after her till she died. So I used to go around to her every morning. I'd drop my children at the nursery. I'd pop round and see her and check her out in the morning, see if she was okay. And then I'd go to the office. And our agreement was not a normal business agreement. It was more that I would look after her until she died, and then the company would be mine. And that's what I did in the end. It was very difficult because she had to have full-time care for the last 2 years. So I would be in and out the house all the time, checking on her care.
So Erna never married. She had no children. And so when she did die, you took ownership of the company. And that was something that had always been agreed, was it?
Yes, it had always been agreed. It had always been agreed. Well, I mean, from early on, she was testing me for many years. I think I probably had a good 7 or 8 years of testing before to see if I had the mettle. And I remember her interviewing my mother almost and interviewing Mensun, my husband, just to check that, she wanted to be involved with the family, which was nice. She didn't have her own family at this point. Most of them had died, all the people around her anyway. So, but she definitely checked up on me to make sure I could actually do it. And it took a long time before this was actually agreed. So, yeah, it wasn't straightforward. It was really after I had my first son, Cody, in 1990, when she tested me in my when I was pregnant to see whether I would come back, I'm sure, and gave me really quite a tough time over it, probably tougher than a man would. I had to come back after 3.5 months, which nearly broke me. But that was my major test. But I got through that. And then she actually very much softened after that. She saw I was going to be there for good. I wasn't going to be a soft person falling out.
Right. And so, well, you took ownership in 2002. And then, not long after that, 2003, you founded Erna Low Property. Was that something that you'd always thought about doing, or was that really driven by that demand for ARC 1950? In fact, maybe it would be useful if you explained the ARC 1950 project. Some people might not be familiar with it.
Sure. No, it's something I was really interested in. I've always been interested in the property market, and I've been watching the ski market and seeing all these huge developments going on in the Alps, small and huge. And I was contacted by Intrawest from Canada to see if I would work with them as a tour operator, because we're proper tour operator, and we sent a lot of people to the Alps at that point, and especially Les Arcs. So they contacted myself, and they also contacted Savills, the property company, to see whether we would be willing to do some deal on selling property. And I remember the meeting particularly well because they took me out to this field above, sort of just below up to 2000 and above 1800, beautiful field, and we imagined what the resort would be like. And they took me out to lunch and sort of wined and dined me and said, well, we'd love to work with you. Can we work down your database? And, we'll give you a commission back on every person who might buy a property. And I was really nice to them, but I'd learnt from my experience of Erna to say no to things. And I said, no, actually, I don't want to do it that way. I'm going to be an estate agent, and I'm going to get the qualifications, and I'm going to sell property for you. So I went off and got a carte professionnelle while they were doing all the off-plan building was happening. I got myself in a position to be a proper French estate agent, went through all the tests and exams you have to do to be a French estate agent. Because to be honest, if you try to sell property on your travel company, you get thrown in jail in France. It's a serious thing. You have to have all the credentials. So I got all the credentials. It took a year or two to get them. It wasn't easy. And became a proper French estate agent and set up the separate company, Erna Low Property, to sell the properties. And myself, along through Erna Low Property and Savills International, we were responsible for selling 80% of the resort. And it was a very exciting collaboration because it worked really well alongside Savills, who were a very good company, and ourselves and the resort.
Just to put that in context, some listeners might not be aware of how unusual it was that this development actually came about. because they might be able to visualize arc 1600, 1800, 2000, and that field that you're talking about, arc 1950, that little spot in between, it's very rare for a development of that size to actually go through in recent decades.
Yes, very rare. Yeah, it is. And I think it was the power of Intrawest from Canada, because they built Whistler and Tremblant, and they came with this concept of luxury self-catering. That's what the resorts wanted. If you go to Arc 1800 and 1600 and 2000, they're wonderful apartments, but not particularly luxury. So the resort loved the idea of having a Canadian developer, and also that the Canadian developer put all the money in. They did the whole thing for them. So yes, it is an unusual thing, and it was, I think, the one and only. Well, there may be other times, but in my head, I can only think the one and only kind of Canadian development in the Alps, isn't it?
I think you're right there. And actually, something else you mentioned that your last skiing was in Les Arcs. That was in Arc 1950. That was the 20th anniversary of that. Is that correct?
Yes, it's a 20th anniversary, and it's a blossoming resort. It's still as good as it was when it was first built. A tremendous ski destination, and it's really great for me to look back, and I can't think I'm looking back over 20 years of a really strong product that has got so much demand, of families of all types, very international. So no, I'm really proud of my collaboration in it. I still own the estate agency there, although I don't own Erna Low Property anymore. I'd sold that in a management buyout to Francois Marchand, who's extremely experienced, worked for me for over 15 years, maybe longer. He now runs Erna Low Property, but I still have involvement by a little bit in the resort, but it's his to take on to the future.
We'll also come on to selling Erna Low as well. But I wondered if I could just, in 2012, it was the 80th anniversary of Erna Low, the founding of the company, after that first ad that appeared that Erna put into the Times. And we refer briefly to Mark Frary's biography. I interviewed him about it on an earlier episode of the Ski Podcast. The title is Aiming High, The Life of Ski and Travel Pioneer Erna Low. Now, that book only exists because you commissioned it. So I wondered, why you did that and how you chose Mark to be the author of that biography.
Mark, in some ways, it was such an easy decision, because I wanted to find someone who would do the research and all the hard work behind it to write this book and the biography. And Mark is an excellent writer, journalist. He'd written a lot of books already. He was passionate about it. I've known him for quite a long time, and he just seemed the obvious person. I also picked at the same time, they worked together, Steve Keenan, who used to be a journalist from the Times, who went through every single cine film of Erna Low from the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and he digitalized them so that we had a really proper record. Because it did, I could see I was coming later into my career at this point, and I could see that the thing that was exciting about Erna Low is that she spanned the whole of the 20th century and still continues, and it shows the power of the brand, and I wanted to get that across to people. And, Mark was probably about the best decision I ever made, was for him to do that. She also used to keep saying to me, I'm leaving you all my archive, all my photos, all this. And it used to stress me out, thinking, what do I do with them? So this was a perfect opportunity. I now feel it's all fully recorded.
When I talked to Mark about it, he did make it clear that it was a pretty mighty task. There's a sense, perhaps, that Erna Low was a bit of a hoarder. Wasn't there a complete room full of archive material, more or less stored at random?
There was indeed. She kept photographs of everything. She kept slides, cines, everything, letters from clients, all sorts of things. Mark had the biggest challenge. I tried to be his assistant behind him and would try to field things through and so on. But I could see, it was incredibly difficult for him to choose what to put in and what not to. And, she'd got some wonderful stories of skiing with royalty, Princess Anne and people like that. And she had wonderful letters from all sorts of people of all backgrounds. So it was a massive, massive challenge for Mark. And I really admire him, how he managed to sort of hone it down into a really good social history biography of the travel market, really, in the 20th century.
I have read it. And it is very good. And, people who are listening to the podcast who are interested in that history of the ski and indeed travel industry, it's worth reading for sure. And I'll put a link into the show notes to include some of the vintage film footage that Steve put together as well. But I think it's really a fitting tribute to Erna Low that you helped create there, the legacy.
I might just add one thing. What was wonderful too was that her godson, who was still alive at that point, he helped to sort of head it up for me. And he was Roger Lloyd Pack, who was Trigger from Only Fools and Horses. And he was her godson. His mother used to work for Erna for years. She was called Uli Lloyd Pack, a wonderful person. And so it was nice to know that I had at that point, well, even at 80 years, there were still people related back to her youth involved. And Roger sadly died just a year or two later after that. But it was great having him there to sort of help push forward this incredible brand.
So you'd taken over the company. The biography of Erna came out. In 2019, you stepped back from the company and sold Erna Low Travel to NUCO Travel. So I'm thinking by that stage, you must have been with the company for nigh on 40 years. Was it difficult to part after so many years?
It was difficult to part, but I was thinking about it, Iain, and I think some of it comes from the fact that Erna Low stayed on at the company so long. I never wanted to do that. I never wanted to be there until I dropped. You need to recognize in business when is the right time to leave. And I recognized that I didn't want to be doing this forever. And I had a good relationship with NUCO, who are a really visionary company. It was wonderful when I started having the talks about it, because they said they wanted to take it on as the brand as it is, develop it into the modern age, because it was, I like to think it was vintage, but it was perhaps a bit old fashioned. Whereas NUCO has now updated it in a really cool vintage way. And they've got it, they're really building the family brand even more. But what I'm more proud of is the fact that they still have all the key people behind the company, Jane and Rebecca and Callum and all these people, Kathleen, who used to work for me. They're still there. And that is a huge credit to NUCO that they have managed to keep a ski company. This is 5 years ago, and they still have managed to keep the customer care staff, the knowledge there, which is quite rare. Normally when you sell a company, it gets just kind of incorporated and off it goes.
Excellent. Well, we haven't touched on your personal life, but you mentioned your husband earlier, and he is Mensun Bound. Now, that name may ring a bell with some listeners, because you mentioned he's a marine archaeologist. He is actually most famous for finding the lost wreck of the Endurance, and that was, Sir Ernest Shackleton's ship. It was sunk, crushed by ice back in 1915, and Mensun's team found it in March 2022, and that raised headlines all over the world. I know this is slightly off the ski podcast, but maybe you could explain exactly how difficult it was to actually find that wreckage.
Oh, that was a massive challenge. I mean, my husband had been working on that for over 10 years. And his first expedition after many, many years of preparation when he went out was 2019. And it was ended up being a bit of a disaster because they lost one of their ROVs, their remote operated vehicles. But he was very fortunate to be given a second chance to go back in 2022. So it was a huge operation. And I'd been kind of following that on the side while I was selling the company. And it was so exciting to see that project and to be part of it. So I kind of feel, although I sold the company was hard, I moved straight into sort of working to help him, to sort of manage him on his events, books, all sorts of things. So we now work together on that, which is really exciting.
And so you're now working as his manager, I think.
Yes.
What does that involve?
I am. And I fix up all his, he works on cruise ships, and we've just been down to Antarctica twice last winter with Lindblad, a wonderful cruise company where he was speaker. So I organise all those kind of events for him and his talks. He has talks all over the world. We've done several international book tours together, which I've organised for him. We just sort of dovetail each other. And it's lovely that you can come to this point in life and actually share all that.
And am I right in thinking that you told me something like off air when we were talking about this podcast before, but is there like a TV program in relation to the Endurance coming out or something like that?
Yeah, you're right. It's not actually TV. It's a film in the cinemas, and it'll be streamed on Disney Plus, and it's due out later this year. And it will be called Endurance, and it's all about finding the ship. So it's going to be quite a big deal. That comes out later this autumn.
I look forward to seeing that one. So he's a Sunday Times best-selling writer, and his book is The Ship Beneath the Ice. I find it kind of nicely, perhaps ironic that you're still involved in something that's snow-related, even
I
if it's
know. I
if
mean,
it's fictional.
how lucky, how blessed am I to be able to be still snow related? I felt that when I was down in Antarctica twice. I thought, I can't believe this. And so I'm doing more cross country. I'm a bit more like you, Iain. I do a lot more kind of walking and jogging and stuff than I used to. And I'm doing so much walking in Antarctica and loving it. And it's all snow related. How lucky is that? It's really exciting. We didn't expect that his book will become a Sunday Times bestseller. And I think probably my work in the travel business set me up really well to be in a good role to take that on.
I'm delighted to hear that. I look forward to seeing his film, but I wanted to, thank you primarily for, sharing your time today and giving us that insight into Miss Erna Low. Really, to thank you for the legacy that you put together for Erna Low through Mark's biography, etc. But also that insight into bringing those French resorts and Art 1950 into play. It's been really interesting having a chat. So thank you very much for your time today, Joanna.
I'll just say one last thing. I think what's wonderful for me is to have the legacy carried on into the next generation by such brilliant companies as NUCO Travel and also Erna Low Property headed up and continuing into the future under Francois. So I'm very lucky. And I'm also very lucky to be involved with Consensio, which is a wonderful chalet company. So I don't feel I'm completely out of the Alps.
Excellent. Well, that's brilliant, Joanna. Thanks very much for your time.
All right. Bye-bye.
Well, listener, I hope you found that as interesting as I did. Why not let me know? I enjoy all feedback about the show. I like to know what you think, especially about these features. So please contact me on social at The Ski Podcast or by email, theskipodcast@gmail.com. We've had a bit of feedback since our last episode. Rob Smith on Instagram said, I listened to episode 217 this morning, and I'm now adding Saint Martin de Belleville to my visit list. Matt MGLX on Spotify said, I finally got round to clicking 5 stars on Spotify. Thanks for keeping me sane on my commute to work. And Pat from Ireland, I particularly like to thank you. He bought me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/a ski podcast. And he said, I really enjoy the podcast. I mix current episodes with those from your back catalogue. As someone who found skiing in middle age, I'm completely hooked. There are concepts I'm not familiar with, such as chalet holidays, and it'd be great if you did a feature on chalet holidays for the uninitiated on how they work. Keep up the brilliant work, and here's to winter. So thank you, Pat. I'll bear that in mind and see if we can put that in. Now, if you like the podcast, there are 3 things you can do to help. You can review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, as Matt did. You can subscribe so you never miss an episode. And you can book your ski hire with InSport Rent using the code SKIPODCAST or simply take the link in the show notes. Now, there are now 230 episodes of the Ski Podcast, and you might be interested to know that our equipment specials are being published on the Skipedia YouTube channel as well. So if you'd like to see me and Al share our thoughts on the best ski equipment for 2025, you can do that there. But if audio is your thing, you can find all 230 episodes at theskipodcast.com. There is so much to listen to in our back catalogue. We have covered so many destinations, stories, interviews. Just go to theskipodcast.com, search around those tags and categories, and I bet you will find something of interest in there. You can follow me at Skipedia and the podcast at The Ski Podcast. But for now, I'd like to thank Joanna for sharing her time with me, and thank you, listener. And until next time, goodbye.